Today we're going to be mixing Arctic Fox in the colors Iris Green with Neon Moon. I've noticed a lot of Halloween decor this year is leaning on that kind of neon side, and it made me want to try and fit in a neon color during Halloween or October. For me, it's all Halloween. And I already had this mix on my schedule, so I actually rearranged some things so that I could film it sooner than later. But essentially the goal is to try and get a more cool toned neon-y green, because I know Arctic Fox obviously already has a neon green. So this is Space Cowgirl, and these are the two mixes we're going to do. And if you're wondering, this right here is the iris on its own, so you can see the difference. I'm really hoping they glow under a black light when we're done. But first, you may notice my swatches are numbered 1 through 12. I do just want to say that's not supposed to be synonymous with hair levels. 1 is pink, 2 is gray, 3 is a light to medium natural red, 4 is a soft black, and then 4 to 11 is a range that goes to platinum blonde, and then 12 is like a toned version of number 11. So with my mix videos, I like to do at least 2 ratios if possible. You saw we are doing 2 today, and I like to do the darker one on the top and the lighter one on the bottom. So for the first mixture we're doing, it's going to be equal parts. So that's 1 part of the iris green to 1 part of the neon moon. And I do just want to say everyone's hair is different. Everyone's hair takes color differently. So please just use this video as a reference for how this could maybe turn out for you. Plus, different screens and monitors can definitely affect the color, especially in undertone. So just keep that in mind as you're watching. For the second mixture, we're gonna do a 2-to-1 ratio. So again, that is 1 part of the iris, but this time 2 parts neon moon. I almost considered mixing neon moon with Neverland, but I thought that would give a slightly more dusty look versus a neon, so I decided to go with iris instead. But if you have any other interesting mix ideas, feel free to comment down below or put that in my Google form that I have linked below as well. I'm gonna let this sit for about 2 hours to let the color fully absorb into these swatches. I will then rinse it out, and when it's dry, I will meet you back here and we can do some comparisons. As a quick reminder, my swatches are not virgin hair. So virgin hair tends to be less porous, which means it can struggle to take and or hold on to semi-permanent color. And that is especially important to remember when doing lighter dye, because the chances of it taking on the darker swatches are less likely, especially if your hair is virgin. Now I know generally whether you're in house lighting or outside like natural lighting with like direct sunlight or cloudy can definitely change how a color looks, but I felt like I especially noticed that with this one in natural lighting, which I will have a picture of that at the end of the video. I just felt like I could see a lot more of the yellow coming through on the bottom part of the swatches versus right now we're in house lighting with a diffused ring light. Overall, it definitely looks more cool compared to how it looked before. So obviously the platinum blonde is the brightest, the most neon. That's usually the intended pre-color you're supposed to use dyes on, especially semi-permanent for the most part, and especially neon ones. So to get a true neon look, you do want to make sure your hair is as light as possible. But starting with number 1, that one was pink. Red and green are technically across from each other on the color wheel. So variations of that, like a pink instead of a red mixed with a lighter green, they can neutralize each other out at times. And I do feel like that is happening here, where you lose a lot of that saturation from the green. In some parts, it almost does look a little bit more yellowy. And because the undertone of the swatch and the undertone of the dye are kind of fighting with each other, there are parts that are a little bit patchy. So if you have pink hair and you're looking to do a neon green, I would definitely try to make sure your hair is as light as possible and you got as much of that pink out as possible, because they might clash. 2 was our gray swatch. The gray on its own obviously had a lot of dustiness, so you get a lot of that coming through. So aka you lose a lot of the neon brightness you get on the platinum blonde swatch. But overall, it still took really well. I see a nice smooth consistency on both the top and the bottom. And spoiler alert, it does glow under black light. So if that's more so what you're looking for, that is a positive note. 3 was our light to medium natural red. I'm going to group that in with 6 and 7. So the iris on its own is more pigmented than the neon moon because the neon moon is just so light. Therefore, I see more of a difference on the top part of these swatches. On the bottom with more neon moon, I see a little bit of a difference on 7. There's definitely still a difference on 6 and 3 as well, but it kind of just warmed up the swatch. But then the green mixed in kind of desaturated it at the same time, which, mentioning that, I would say especially on 3 and 6, the green did sort of desaturate the swatches as well, with a slight green hue. But overall, I wouldn't say it took very well on them. Maybe on the top of 7, maybe, depending on the goal that you're doing. So again, strand test, depending on what you want. Even though it looks this way on my swatch, it could look completely different on your hair. 4 was our soft black. Not really much of a difference there. For like a soft black, not a jet black, sometimes you can change the undertone a little bit with a very, very pigmented color, but in this case, not pigmented enough. And then 5, I didn't group it in with 3, 6, and 7 because it didn't take the color as well as 3, 6, and 7. Not that 3, 6, and 7 took it amazingly, but 5 took it even less, especially on the bottom. There might be a slight bit more warmth on the bottom, but I truly can't tell. And the top, I think, might be a tad bit ashier from the green, but again, it's such a minute difference. I don't see any actual color coming through. Like, I don't see a distinct yellow or a green on number 5. Number 8 is where I feel a little bit more confident about suggesting a color. You know, number 7 has a kind of swampy, mossy look, but you still see some of those natural tones coming through, whereas 8, it finally starts to kind of fully cover. But again, 8, 9, and 10, even 12 are not necessarily neon. They're just sort of a medium to lighter green. And then for 8 and 9, the bottoms look pretty similar, where they both took color, but it's just not super distinctive enough. Like, I definitely see a green hue, but I would say it almost looks like faded, maybe. At least with number 10 on the bottom section with more new moon, it looks a lot more intentional. So for the bottom half, you definitely need super, super light hair. For the top mixture, it's a little bit more forgiving, but again, to get the neon look, you still have to have very light hair. So 12 looks a little bit more cool toned compared to a majority of the swatches, I would say. Actually, I think it is the most cool tone. Sometimes the gray swatch will be the most cool tone, but I think the 12 held a little bit more of those slightly blue tones on the top better, and the bottom as well. But obviously the bottom is just going to be more warm with the yellow mixed in. But again, I would say for the intention of what we were doing, especially if you want to use Arctic Fox, since Arctic Fox's neon is more warm, I think this turned out pretty good. And quickly, I just want to show you what it looks like under black light. The one thing I like about the neons is you can kind of see just how well each swatch absorbed the color based off of how much it's glowing. So even 4 and 5 have a very, very light glow to them because they did try to absorb the color. It just didn't really show up. And obviously 11 is the brightest, but pretty much all of them glow to some capacity, which is cool. So now I'd like to do comparisons. And I brought up that Arctic Fox has a neon green many a time, so I thought that would be the smartest comparison to start with. So this is Arctic Fox in the color Space Cowgirl. This is comparable to number 12, 11, 10, and comparable to number 9. Hopefully you can see what I mean now by the Space Cowgirl being much warmer in comparison. Because of that, as you can tell with like Neon Moon, right? It didn't take amazingly on like the 9, for example. So we kind of have a similar thing happening with the Space Cowgirl as the swatches get darker. Again, they are meant to be on platinum blonde hair, but with this specific combo in particular, I think adding in a little bit of iris would help if your hair is a little bit more stubborn, because it adds a little bit more of that pigment. I just wanted to move the Space Cowgirl down so you can see it compared to the more Neon Moon comparison. And even still, Space Cowgirl is way more warm, but they definitely look more similar than the top mix, obviously. The only other thing I would say I notice is that the Space Cowgirl actually does glow more under a black light than our current mixture. Like if you put them next to each other, it just looks brighter. And I have to assume that's because iris does not glow under black light and you're relying completely on the Neon Moon in the mix to get that brightness. But again, the mix still does glow, just not as much as the neons by itself. And then I wanted to do a comparison that was probably the most similar in my collection, and that is Iroiro in the color Neon Green. So this is comparable to number 12, 11, 10, and comparable to number 9. Now looking at this, I would say our mixture for Arctic Fox probably lies in between the Space Cowgirl and the Iroiro Neon Green. Our mix is a little bit lighter. The Iroiro by itself is actually quite dark for being a neon. And as far as undertone goes, they're actually quite similar. Even just the diluted section next to our Neon Moon mix, they look very, very similar. So if your hair is even more stubborn and you don't think that our Arctic Fox mix would work for you, the Neon Green is pretty pigmented again for a neon, so you might have better luck with that, but obviously again it's a little bit darker, and so you kind of have to choose your battles. With that being said, because this is the Iroiro is a neon truly on its own, it's not mixed with anything, again it is brighter under a black light than our mix. And the cool thing about that is even though the diluted section is diluted with conditioner, it still glows brighter than our mix. So take that information however you'd like. And one more thing actually that I'm noticing now is it kind of seems like the top mix with slightly more iris is also a tiny bit softer, a little bit less saturated compared to the neon green, which makes sense because iris is a slightly more soft kind of green by itself. But I think that's more noticeable on the 11 and less noticeable on the other swatches. All right, now I'd like to do the before and after clips. Those, as well as everything after this point in the video, will all be done in natural lighting. I hope my video helped. If you have a request, I do have a link below to a Google form you can fill out. Just remember, I only do brands that do not test on animals. Thank you so very much to my patrons, and thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.